All right, I'm gonna. There's so much water like hidden in places up here. It's like there's some there, and then I reach under the podium and there's more water, and that's really great, but excessive. I'm gonna read three poems that all have the same title from a series I started writing in January. And like, if you want, we can talk about why they have the same title later, but not now. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? Drake said, "Y'all better not come to my funeral with that fake shit." And this is how I knew he'd never slept on a floor, by way of his loneliness and empty pockets. What is neither here nor there is that I cling to the past because in it I had yet to know pain, and therefore I was held only by that which desired my boyish appetite. We buried Tyler, and the violets I placed on his grave were plastic and cost $4.99 at the corner store by the punk house where we had cake on his 19th birthday, and there were purple heart-shaped petals iced into the corner of it. And I am saying that I would not know a real violet if I ran my hands along what I imagine is its silk jaw. I would not know, even if you pulled a string of them from your pockets and gently placed a string along my neck and said someone not here thought this would look pretty on you. Friends, the trick to this one is that I laid the plastic on the grave which I least wanted to dig. Death itself, that fake shit I stay praying to show up somewhere. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? Free love till the check comes and me and mine reach in our fruitless pockets for the wallets we know we left at the crib next to the framed black and whites of our divorced or widowed parents. There were hand-drawn daisies on the De La Soul album cover once, and now I stay on that hippie shit. Arms open the length of a day's eye, and no one running towards them but in a state of ghosts, hand-drawn from the depths of memory all my worst enemies keep. Native tongue, and all that means is I know the exact ground from which my moans owe their treacherous birth. I know which branch of a tree will bend under a storm's weight and offer its palms to my begging mouth. The satisfaction in breaking a well-cooked egg is in the yellow, clawing its way beyond a bondage of white. There is nothing more arrogant than beauty at rest. De La said D-A-I-S-Y meant the inner sound, y'all, and I guess that explains the insomnia. Y'all, the inner sound is the long silence between a door slamming and the kiss of a lock which says, "You will never again in your life." Put that on everything. Put that on the book I slid under a table leg to stop my yolk from running. Put that on any room so empty, every name inside is an echo. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? With my eyes closed long enough, I can at least remember the popping of gum thrashing between Jasmine's teeth. I would like for memory alone to declare me forgiven, but I would be lying if I said I recall the color of the dress or the way her hair spread its many arms along the blacktop. I nurse whatever visions I must for the sake of enduring, of course. I tell myself the popping was gum. I tell myself that she was pulled to the ground by revelry and nothing else. I do not ask you to relive with me the funeral, though of course you know there was one. Thanks. I'm going to read something else now. Those were poems, and I'm going to read an essay, or like a part of an essay. So I'm working on a book that is about the history of black performance in the United States through the lens of dance, mostly through the lens of dance and movement. And so I'm trying to find threads between like minstrel shows and sports, or trying to find threads between like dance parties and boxing. And so like I set out trying to connect all these things, and the most obvious thing that I've been unraveling for a while is the fact that Whitney Houston couldn't dance. Has anyone ever seen, you don't have to have seen it, but you should go home and watch it. Has anyone ever seen the performance that opens the 1986 Grammy Awards of Whitney Houston performing I Want to Dance with Somebody? That's, you don't have to have seen it, but go home and watch it. I'm going to talk about it in this thing. But I had to do a bunch of research on that because it's funny. The funny thing about that performance is the Grammy producers were like, this is great, like Whitney Houston's gonna dance and sing this song, and then she showed up and they were like, fuck, she can't dance. What are we gonna do? I'm gonna read a little bit of this essay. I'm not gonna read the whole thing because it's like thousands upon thousands of words, but I'll read several sections of it. It's about that and also about Soul Train lines, which, like, the history of Soul Train lines are wild because they started with this dance called the Stroll, which was just like white people just walking really slowly down. It's like haunting if you watch the videos on YouTube because they're from the 50s, and you usually get these two like white kids like walking arm in arm down this line while the line like sways. It's really haunting. It's like I don't know. Anyway, here's this piece. Don't watch it, but do. Friends, I may come to you under the cover of night, after the face of a wooden table has become well acquainted with a chorus of open palms slapping it after laughter, or on beat to some tune spooling out of a single speaker. I may come to you in the moments after the party, but before sleep. I speak of this moment, and you will know I mean the exact hour where the once cold drinks sit half finished and gathering a warmth in their pockets. The exact hour where people surely must go home so that their friends can go to bed, but also do not want the night to end. I will come to you in this hour where sleep paces the room like an eager dog, daring someone to make the first move. In this hour where things spoken can perhaps be passed off as fatigue and forgotten in the morning. The first time I ever told a girl I love you was on a couch at exactly 3:45 a.m. while her eyes were heavy, and she smiled before drifting off to sleep and told me we have to wake up in the morning, and we never spoke of love again. I tell you this to tell you that I might come to you at a time when you are eager for the night to erase the memory of a conversation, friends. And I will tell you what I know. And what I know is that Whitney Houston could not dance. I have made my peace with this, and I beg of you to do the same. You may not know that Whitney Houston could not dance, but I am telling you that she could not dance to save her life or the life of anyone she loved. And I knew this first at the 1988 Grammy Awards, where the showrunners asked Whitney to open the show with an elaborate performance of I Want to Dance with Somebody, and realized that they could, under no circumstances, open the show with that song and have Whitney stand still behind a microphone, as she did the year before when she sang The Greatest Love of All at the 1987 Grammy Awards, barely moving, but for the slight upward tick of an arm for the sake of flair when the song began to soar. No, in 1988, Whitney Houston would have to sing I Want to Dance with Somebody, and she would have to find her groove somewhere. To that point, Whitney was a largely stationary pop star. On her second album, 1987's Whitney, the pop landscape has shifted slightly. Whitney Houston's first self-titled album, released 2 years earlier, was awash with ballads, showing off her singular range and vocal control. The album's cover is drenched in rich mahogany tones, and Houston sits inside of a square, an impossible brown glow emanating from her skin, gently kissed by what I will tell myself could only be natural sunlight. Hair slicked back into a tight ponytail. A single string of pearls adorn her neck. She appears both stoic and regal, far older than the 21 years of age she was at the time of the album's release, and in some ways, this was what was demanded of the career trajectory she chose. She didn't enter the game to compete with pop stars. She entered the game to compete with traditional, big voice singers who were years older than her. On the cover of Whitney, the like second album, it's hard because in like print it's in italics and it's hard to say, you know what I mean. On the cover of Whitney, Houston's hair is massive, puffed up to the sky and seemingly endless. Endless, the way one might also describe the smile which is stretched across her face. She wears a white tank top and looks as if she is mid-dance move. The album's title, Whitney, is scrawled across the top left corner of the album cover in a font which can best be described as Miami Vice cursive. It is really something to name your first 2 albums after yourself, if you think about it. It is like entering the same room twice with a different outfit each time and reintroducing yourself to everyone as if you've never met them. I'm going to skip a paragraph, but the paragraph's about the music video, I Want to Dance with Somebody. Has anyone seen it? So the music video is how she kind of tricked people. The music video requires her, like, shows her doing like a lot of like from here up dance moves with like a lot of arms and stuff. And so the Grammy people were like, of course she can dance, look at this video, but you never see her feet. And so when she showed up, they were like, oh, she has like no footwork whatsoever. This is awful. So that's the gist of that paragraph. It is possible that the people at the Grammys did not think this through. Or It is possible that Whitney Houston herself actually believed that she was a very good dancer, because that is one of those lies it is easy to tell ourselves. We are often not on the receiving end of the disaster. A lie that we are often none the wiser to, like, all my jokes kill in every room, or I'm extremely good in bed, or any number of things that people will not put us out of our misery about by pulling our card. But when it was seen that Whitney could not get the job done, there was a panic. And so the producers at the Grammy Awards decided three things. First, the performance would have to be as elaborate as possible to distract from Houston's potential dancing failures. The stage was large, and the performance was once slated to be a dance number between Houston and a single dance partner. With that plan seemingly doomed, producers chose to pack the stage with as many dancers as possible, each participating in separate but loosely synchronized routines. The idea was, if something was happening on every corner of the stage, Houston would never have to be the central focus. Second, they decided that the performance would be massive, one of the longest of the night, divided into two parts. Whitney would come out and sing the first part of the song, and then go backstage during the bridge so that the Grammy Awards announcer could welcome the audience and give a list of presenters and performers, which would flash across the television screen while the band and dancers remained on stage, dancing to the instrumental. To remove Whitney from the space and let the choreography without her be memorable for an entire 2 minutes, in hopes that it might make the first section forgettable if Whitney could not pull off the elaborate dance numbers she couldn't. Third, in the first part of the performance, which consisted of the more complex dance routines, they dressed Houston in high-waisted pants with a massive butterfly buckle adorning her waist. It is almost comical in appearance now, 80s enough to pass, but so massive that when Houston was the focus of the camera, it is all one can focus on. She was in heels, high and sharp enough to make walking along the slick stage complicated. She was tentative and tense. It is one thing to look fun and free in a music video. It is another to be one of the biggest pop stars in the world on the stage in front of all your friends and heroes, being asked to conjure unfamiliar magic. It perhaps did not help that the choreography of the first section of the performance was rigid, confusing, and cluttered. An awkward stroll with two guitar players who were definitely not playing their instruments. Dancers rotating around Whitney in a circle of elaborate moves while she kind of half shimmies and looks around at them with a mixture of concern and confusion. A supremely puzzling moment where Whitney and her dancers briefly put on sunglasses to do a few body rolls and then take them off, but have nowhere to put them smoothly. And then Whitney darts backstage eagerly. And there's truly no person or thing which exits the room in one outfit and returns anew in an entirely different outfit like the butterfly, who first crawls listlessly along the landscape before spinning itself a bed, inside of which it can become beautiful, a winged creature even. What a mercy it must be to be able to sleep oneself into both beauty and flight, a world which you knew but then not at all, a space in which you enter the room and make the old versions of yourself forgettable. I look in mirrors each morning, and all I have to show for myself is the same face I was born with and have carried through the world since I was born, and I suppose it could be worse. It could always be worse. I don't need to carry beauty around, at least not on my own person. I want, instead, to fill my hands with whatever beauty I can steal from all of your best moments. All of the things we might watch together in shared love, like the moment when Whitney Houston emerged from backstage at the Grammys in 1998 after the song's bridge. She was in a white dress with slightly smaller heels, her hair puffed up like it was on her album cover. The moment where Whitney left the room as Whitney Houston and reemerged as Whitney in bright 80s cursive, sliding easily through a parade of dancers, kind of on beat, but kind of not, but certainly no longer giving a fuck. When she gets to the very top of the stage, a tall black dancer in a suit emerges, seemingly from nowhere. He extends his hand to her and they spin and kick. He twists her into his arms and she puts the microphone by her waist and loosely and eagerly swings in his grasp. The moment lasts all of 25 seconds, but it is the entire performance, everything the song is asking for. I Want to Dance with Somebody is a song that is more about forgiveness than anything else. if we are to redefine the concept of love and what we ask out of the people we love and the people who love us, this is clear. Whitney Houston is saying that to leave the house and go looking for a dance floor is not necessarily done out of love, but the person you find willing to occupy your space for a song or two is your person for that moment. You two are mutually linked by a decision to, if nothing else, make each other look acceptable in front of the other thrashing bodies. Consider what it is to want to feel heat in a way that is not sexual, but perhaps born out of rituals of shared space. The way black people danced in basements of juke joints because those were the only places they could. Consider what it is to want to escape something on fire to summon a different kind of fire, but mostly consider the chorus. I want to dance with somebody who loves me. I want to dance with somebody who might forgive me for my failure to dance. I want to dance with somebody who will know, as I do, that there are songs which summon movement even out of those of us who cannot move well. And I want to dance with somebody who loves me enough to lie to me until the record stops. In the earliest days of the Soul Train line, before people began to cheat the system, your partner was chosen for you by virtue of the lineup, men on one side, women on the other. There was no time to figure out choreography with someone. You would have a moment to lock eyes before taking to the line, but then it was just the two of you, at the mercy of each other's movements, in a physical space that is tight, a single line of clapping hands urging you and your partner forward. The Soul Train line is rigorous. A pair of dancers cannot go backwards and don't have much space for lateral movement. They have to dance their way out of the line's exits, and they have to do it well because everyone there can dance. No one there is fucking around. And if you can't dance, there is no backstage to run toward in order to reinvent yourself. And so the dancers have to rely on what they know of the body to figure themselves out of the brief, hot room with nothing but noise and instincts to guide them to each other before they reach the end of the line in part, maybe forever. And I think this is how I would most like to imagine romance, friends, or should I say lovers. In praise of all my body can and cannot do, I wish to figure out how it can best sing with all of yours for a moment in a room where the walls sweat. I wish to lock eyes across a dance floor from you while something our mother sang in the kitchen plays over the speakers. I want us to find each other among the forest of writhing and make a deal. Okay, lover, it is just us now. The only way out is through.
Well, dang. Yeah. Dang, that was, yeah, I enjoyed that.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you. No, so, so I have questions prepared, but I sort of feel moved to ask, like, because, this is one of the new projects you're working on, is this book about performance and performance, like, in Black life and via Black bodies.
Yeah.
So what's your personal relationship to movement?
So I played soccer and basketball when I was young. I played soccer up through college. And in one of those sports, I was much more tokenized than the other, obviously. And so a thing that I did for this project, for example, was to go back and look at my old scouting reports, my soccer scouting reports. And all of them were about the way my body moved, and none of them were about, like, my intellect, which, like, I don't know if there are soccer fans in here, but I played a position where I was undersized. And so, like, in my opinion, a lot of my game relied on my intellectual ability, right? But so many of the things were about how well I moved or how much ground I could make up because I was fast or whatever. And I was interested in that kind of, like, tokenization. And so I think that is the thing that fueled this project. That and, like, this thing about Bernie Mac and Mike Tyson. Those are the two things that fueled this project.
Yeah. Can you speak about, like, the Bernie Mac and Mike Tyson?
Yeah, I was thinking about, did anyone see me read it, Women and Children First? Yeah, because some of you heard me talk about this already. I was thinking about Black masculinity and fear, and I thought about Bernie Mac at the Apollo the first time. The iconic, Bernie Mac has this iconic performance where he comes out of the Apollo for the first time, and what does he say when he goes on stage?
I ain't scared of you, motherfucker.
I ain't scared of you motherfuckers. And every time he makes the audience laugh, he repeats that refrain. So I'm not scared of you motherfuckers. But he was, right? He was very
terrified.
afraid. You know what I mean? And I think, like, that to make oneself larger. And we saw that with Tyson, I think, early in his career, where there are some boxing experts who talk about like the way Mike Tyson fought early in his career. He like knocked people out early because he was so afraid of having to go long rounds. Which, I mean, we saw what happened the first time he had to go like, really deep into with a real fighter. Buster Douglas, who's from East Side of Columbus, Ohio, by the way. And so I was interested in something. There's something about that that's also very hip hop, like to make oneself. And something about that is like very toxic, obviously too. And I wanted like, I wanted to like unravel all those things. But something about like the artist or the masculine artist making himself larger so that no target is big enough to fit him felt like that was another part of black performance that I wanted to unravel. Yeah, it's funny because I thought that was a bad idea, and how the book worked out was like, I got an email from like the VP of Random House or whatever, and he was like, I like They Can't Kill Us. I want to see what your next time you're in New York. Like, let's just come by and show me what you're working on. And I felt like it's like when you like someone asks you to like come through for a record deal and you just bring like a CD. I bought these jumbled notes because like this shit for me, especially the Burning Back Mike Tyson shit. Like I had like just diagrams of stuff I was like making on my wall at home, and he was like, "Well, just show me what you're working on." So I bought this like stack of papers that was very little, like not a lot of writing. It was just like me drawing all these maps. And I was like, well, this is kind of what I'm working on. And it's about like minstrel shows kind of, but also not. And he was like, cool. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how to explain it very well, but here's a bunch of stuff. And then I just like sheepishly left the office. And then like an hour later, my agent was like, hey, Random House wants to buy that book. So we'll see if they regret that or not.
Too late now.
Too late now.
All right, cool. That's awesome. So to sort of go back, right, I want to think about, like, you came up playing sports, right?
Yeah.
You also came up sort of in the punk scene, right?
Yeah.
In the sort of DIY punk scene. And the thing that strikes me about both of those things, right, particularly the sports that you played and the way in which you were engaged in music and music communities, is that it's all about, like, the collective, right? Like, it's all about the team. And I'm just curious if you could, like, talk to us about how you sort of carry that or think about that in your making now as a writer.
I always think about a thing that I challenge people to do in workshops too is like to define their collective we's, right? Because you got like a lot of people throw around the collective we as if we are all one collective we, when it's like there's nothing could be further from the truth in our current situation. You know what I mean? Like my we ain't everybody's we. You know what I mean? Like no disrespect, but like Lena Dunham's we ain't my we. You know what I mean? Like.
Sorry, sorry. It's not my fault.
So even, and I use Lena Dunham to say like, even among the like, we's who my politics might align with, there's some shit I don't, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so that is how I think about it too. When I was on the punk scene, I owe Chicago a great debt, and like Tim and I have talked about this. My buddy Tim's, I'm sorry Tim, I pointed you out to everyone. Have talked about like I owe the Midwest, like Chicago specifically, a great debt for like harboring my interest in punk, because there was like when I was interested in punk and hardcore, Chicago was having like a moment, like a very real, massive moment. You know what I mean? And like for us, for the kids in Columbus is also having a cool moment, but like, for us it was like every weekend was like who can get enough gas money to get a car to go to Chicago. That was just like, or adjacent Chicago, or like adjacent areas, because like LaGrange also had a moment, and like
There it is. Shout out to the western suburbs.
Yeah, but that's where those bands would play, you know what I mean? They would play in like skate parks and like YMCA basements and shit like that. And like, so for us, it was just like, how can we get out here? But even among that, for me being one of the few people of color immersed in these scenes that were sometimes violent for people who weren't white, my we was also the black kids or the queer kids or the othered kids in these scenes. And so I think through my work now especially, I'm always trying to like take the collective we and chisel it out until there's like one or two smaller ones that are very clearly defined by the people who are reading my work and say, well, okay, I know that this is speaking to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man.
Shout out to the LaGrange. Is anyone here from LaGrange? Yeah, shout out to the LaGrange like skate parks and joints. I saw some great bands.
That's great. And also you're welcome on behalf of Chicago.
Yeah, no, for real, like Chicago like definitely defined, if Chicago hadn't have had the moment it had in like the late 90s and early 2000s, I think my music taste would be way different.
Yeah.
I think my music taste wouldn't be as well defined.
Yeah. Can you speak some to your music taste? Because I think one of the things that happens often, right? And we've sort of talked about this is like when you're a music critic of color, when you're a black music critic, there's an expectation that you write about black music.
But everything is black music.
Well, yes, that is true. So
yeah,
and go.
I mean, yeah, I'm the conceit that like. So I get a ton of bad questions, and intentionally, there is some stuff about hip hop, and they can't kill us because I want people to know that like I'm not fucking around. You know what I mean? Like I know my shit, but I intentionally wrote about other things. Or if I did write about hip hop, I'm trying to cast like a wild ass net. Like there's that thing in there about like Migos, but it's also about Johnny Cash, right? And because of that, there's interviews wherein I get like ridiculous questions like, "What's it like to be black and also know what a guitar is?" You know what I mean? It's like. As if like, you know, and I always think like,
I don't know.
You know, what's it like to be black and understand like the Rolling Stones, you know? And it's this weird thing where it's like, you know, if not for black people, the Rolling Stones wouldn't understand the Rolling Stones, you know what I mean?
Truly.
Do people not understand where percussion came from?
Right.
You know, I mean, I don't know, maybe y'all just want a bunch of like atmospheric.
Shout out to Muddy Waters.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so like, I am often trying to like, the best way that I think black people can live in the world with their knowledge is by, you know what I always think about? The critics I grew up loving, be it Lester Bangs or Grill Marcus, who are both like mentors and idols in different ways, they wrote at me like I was supposed to know about the shit they loved the whole time. Lester Bangs wrote about The Clash to me like I was supposed to be born knowing who The Clash were. Yeah. And that is how I fell in love with The Clash, because I had to dig for the meaning in his work, and because I loved his work. And I wanted to dig for what The Clash meant to him. So I am going to write to non-black audiences as if they know the shit I know the whole time, as if they are born knowing who the Migos are. Because I'm going to approach this shit as normal as possible and drag people to the level I'm at. And I think that is kind of how I am most interested in writing about my various tastes. Because the way I learned about music was acting as if it was something I was supposed to know the whole time. Word.
So, I mean, you know, so that question in a lot of ways is very much about content, but one of the things that I'm fascinated about in your work is form, right? Like you're, you know, a music writer who is, you know, writing in a deeply poetic voice. You're also a poet, right? And you're a poet who is sort of like demanding a kind of realism in that work, right? And I know that as a maker who's making across genres, there's often, like, what's the tension there, right? Like, as it comes externally or even internally.
Yeah, it's funny, and I said this to you before. The funny thing about They Can't Kill Us, or my music writing in particular, is that in 2011 I stopped writing music writing. I stopped doing music writing because of the things that people are like praising about the book now. Like in 2011, people were like, "I hate your music writing because it's too poetic and dances around the topic." And now people are like, "Love that. Where can we find more of it?" I was like, "Oh man, like in 2011, no one would pay me to write anything." And so I think if there is tension, it's in trying to like, there's nothing more thrilling to me than the idea that I'm somehow tricking people into reading poems, you know, with just very long. I mean, in They Can't Kill Us, there is a literal poem. Like there is something that was accepted by a poetry journal. And people don't really know, or they do know. I feel like people don't know. In every review of the book, they were like, it's another Whitney Houston thing. It's just like fragmented thing about Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson. And just because it's like in paragraphs, in broken up section-wise, people are like, this essay is just really great. But in another form, that's a literal poem. I mean, in the way it got accepted in the poetry journal, it's like more fragmented in like line breaks or whatever. But I like this idea of tricking people into reading poems because I'm drawing them closer with, you know, what they imagine my music knowledge is. But if there is a tension, it's that I don't want my excitement about that to eclipse this idea that I'm also trying to honor a musician. I'm also trying to I love music and I'm trying to do it justice. And I think that like, I don't want my own desire for linguistic trickery to outdo my passion for, you know, the musicians I love and care about.
Yeah. So is at that point, like, is genre just a bit of like, is it a bit of like elaborate lying? Like,
oh yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Genre doesn't exist to me as something that anything other than a hindrance. You know, like I always think about like Baldwin. Has anyone read the Baldwin book that like The Devil Finds Work? That like book length film criticism. Like it's like fine.
Yeah.
It's not really that good.
Yeah.
It's like well written because it's Baldwin, but he doesn't know shit about film. He's just a guy at the movies, right? But what I love about that is that he at some point committed himself to this idea that even as a guy at the movies, I'm going to bring my best possible writing to every observation I make and commit to the page. And so essentially, I imagine myself as just a guy at the movies, and whatever will get me to the end of this like obsession I have with curiosities is the genre I chase after.
Yeah.
For example, so those first 3 poems I read, right? I've written like 25 of those, and it's because I was watching the poet Ross Gay read, maybe late last year, and this woman was sitting behind me. Ross Gay writes a lot about, like, in my opinion, he writes a lot about like gratitude over grief, but he does it through the lens of like gardening and flowers and things like that. And I was sitting behind this woman who whispered, but it was very, you know how people like think they're whispering, but they're like loud as fuck. It's just like, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna whisper. And it's like, so I was like leaning back and I heard her lean over to her partner and whisper, "How can black people write about flowers at a time like this?" And I thought that was hilarious. And and I went home.
Was she?
She was white.
Was she a black?
No, she was not black,
Different,
which is why it was funny, right? I mean, it would have been funny no matter what, but it was funnier to me because of that. And I was in the day after I went to Arizona, and I was talking to my partner. I was like, "Oh, I have this poem about peonies. I have this poem about like running over my neighbor's peonies." And I told her this story, and she was like, "I think you should write a series of poems about flowers that aren't really about flowers. Like imagine the fun things you could unravel with the flower imagery." And I was like, no. But then I wrote 2, and I got deeply curious, and I was like, how far can I take this thing? And I think that is the question I'm always asking of anything I commit to the page is like, how far can I push myself to like the brink of this curiosity? And I don't even care what's at the end. I don't think I'm going to be right at the end or wrong at the end, or like, I just want to get as far as I can to the edge of this curiosity and see what frightening thing lies beyond that tells me to back off.
Yeah. Now, in terms of, I love the thing you said, genre is a hindrance, right?
For me, yeah.
Do you also approach the music that you listen to in that way?
Yeah, but I think my weird theory about music is that in 10 years there's going to be no such, everything's going to be pop. Because we see it happening if you're truly woke. No, you don't even have to be that woke. Everything is bending towards pop, right? Everything is bending further and further to pop, so that now there will always be a home for like genre stuff, but like it won't make, R&B is pretty much obsolete, and like the old R&B singers, the Tanks or the like, Leela Jameses or these folks are now seen as kind of like niche, like they don't have they're not going to be on the charts on radio because they're not bending enough towards pop, and like rap is bending towards pop, and everything is just like bending and pop is going to be this like it's going to be like one of them shits from Ghostbusters that just like rolls down and sucks up everything, I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it's probably bad, but also I see some good in it. I'm most interested in the rap songs that become immensely popular. Like Panda was the #1 song in the country at one point, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
And before that, Trap Queen was the #1 song in the country, which is also mind-blowing to me. So I think the greater question I have is about like, what is it about the aesthetics of black violence that continue to rocket to the top of all charts?
Yeah.
But that has nothing to do with genre, I guess.
But I mean,
But
I think you might know.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
Right.
I know, but I think that's one of those curiosities I'm chasing after, right?
Yeah.
Which is why, like, the essays in the book about rap are essentially about that. I want to know why Schoolboy Q is like, I'm fine with white people saying nigga at my concerts, right? Like, I'm so curious about that. I'm not even, like, mad at him, but for him, it's like a financial exchange, right? He has that quote where he's like, well, if you're coming to my show, you're putting money in my pocket, so you should be able to say this. And, I think that is the impetus of why this is a thing, right? Because, like, black culture is like an exchange in that way. It's like something to cash in a way. And so I think all the time about that. But, yes, I think overall genres not good. It's going to be obsolete. And so, like, I listen to a lot of stuff. I am most comfortable when I'm kind of listening to the stuff I grew up listening to. I am no longer someone who feels like I have to have an opinion on an album like hours after it drops, which is really refreshing. Not only because I get to stuff when I get to it, but like I really like sitting with the record. You know, like stuff to me sounds better or worse as it ages. Yes, there's stuff to me that sounds instantly, like someone like SZA, you know, like that album sounded very instantly good to me.
Yeah.
And remained instantly good. But something like, you know, Future put out those 2 albums at the top of last year, and I remember listening to Hendrix and thinking like, gosh, this is very bad. Like, this is not a good album. And then I remember sitting with it over the course of like several weeks, and I was like, actually, this is like really emotionally jarring and beautiful. And so I don't know. I say this as someone who is a critic who writes like 1 review a year or 2 reviews a year, you know, like straightforward reviews.
Yeah.
Because I like now being able to sit with the stuff I listen to.
Yeah. So, so we're gonna open it up for questions in a little bit. I want to ask you sort of about just to speak a little bit about the projects you have coming up.
Yeah.
So we talked up top about the book on performance, but you have another book as well.
I have a lot. I have too many books.
Books.
So I have a book coming out either late this year or very early next. It's not a biography, actually. We stopped calling it a biography. It's like notes on a Tribe Called Quest. Yes, there's some historical context, but a lot of it is me writing letters to them. So that'll be out with University of Texas Press either in December or January. I'm excited about that. Fall of next year, my second full-length poetry manuscript is coming out. I'm very excited about that. It's very different from my first. In a logical arc of my poetry career, it's named after a line in a Fall Out Boy song. And then 2020, I have the book on Black performance coming out, and then I have another essay book with Random House coming out that's going to be kind of like They Can't Kill Us, but hopefully a bit like. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really written anything that I'm angling, except for the one massive like multi-part piece on Julian Baker, which I think maybe some people in here have heard me read like sections of, or I think the like main joint is online, although like the biggest part of it is online now. But like that is kind of that direction where I'm like trying to unravel what it is to like, you know, They Can't Kill Us was written at a really horrible time in my life. Like a really horrible time, and I walked out. I went to, you know, I wrote They Can't Kill Us in 3 weeks. The essays that were not in the book, or the essays that were not like published. Sorry. So I wrote like over half of it in 3 weeks, and I went to Provincetown, Massachusetts in the winter. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Provincetown in the winter, but it's like no one's there. It's weird. I was like, I'm depressed and going through a bad thing. Where should I go to write this book? And it's like, oh, let's go to this like ghost town. Where there's like no one there except the town drunks and like the bar keepers that like keep the bars open for them. And it was just this really like devastating and fucked up time, and I like wrote that book in 3 weeks. You know, I wrote the first thing I wrote was the Fall Out Boy Forever essay. I wrote it in like 7 hours. And then I was like, I'm gonna write the rest of this book. And I walked out of that saying like, I'm never gonna suffer for the work I make again.
Yeah.
Like there's never gonna be a world in which I suffer to create. And so I'm interested now, and particularly in this like far down the road second essay book, what it means to create while like happy, but while immersed in joy, but still very aware of life's logical conclusion, right? I was talking to the poet Terrence Hayes recently, and he said, I have no use for hope. And I said, well, that seems really bad. And his response was, well, the end result of all this shit is death anyway, so how hopeful can anyone be? And I thought, gosh, it's also awful. But I like my joy I like the vehicle of my joy with that in the rearview mirror, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Calling death life's logical conclusion. You should be a writer. You should think about it. Cool. So maybe we should open it up for questions. Yeah, I'm sure there are some folks, some thoughts. There should be folks.
And they can be questions about writing, but also they can be about like sneakers or music or ice cream or sports.
Yes.
Yeah, if we could just raise hands, we'll come to you with the microphone.
Yeah, thanks. Really enjoyed the readings, but I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about that comment that you made, that you explore things to the point where there's something frightening at the end of it. And I'm curious what what those might be, you know?
Yeah, and I think like, so I've really gotten past this idea that like all of my obsessions with curiosities have to be tied to production. And so, but when they are, I am interested in really chasing after that until I see no end but my entire production being overwhelmed by it, right? So these flower poems, by example, I recently stopped writing them because I was like, I have 25 and I'm not that interested in flowers. Like the whole thing of these poems is I'm not that interested in flowers, but I'm trying to find the flower as a doorway is the poem, right? The whole thing with a turn in a poem or a volta in a poem is that the volta depends on the hand creating it, right? And so I am saying that the turn in this poem is that this is never about flowers. I don't care about flowers, and I don't care if any of you care about flowers. I care about if you are willing to imagine the flower as a doorway. And when it got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore because the curiosity is now an obsession that is overshadowing my work, and I'm afraid of what that means for my work. That's when I have to stop, I think. Or if the curiosity is forcing me to dig something out of myself that emotionally I can't walk into, that is when I know to stop too. I think it's like a blessing to know when to stop. I imagine that I won't always know, and then I'll be a different artist, but for now I'm thankful that I know when to back away.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. My name is Rakan, and I'm a senior in high school right now. So my question to you is, what advice would you give to upcoming writers and like how to get over writer's block?
Well, here's the thing. What high school do you go to?
It's in the suburbs, Franklin Park.
That's what's up. Shout out to Franklin Park. Do you know where that is?
I do know where that is. Yes.
Is that a neighborhood you frequent?
No, I don't frequent it, but I have heard of it. Yes.
Here's my advice about writer's block, fam. I think that if you were overcome with writer's block, it might be a good idea to not write. And I know that seems ridiculous, but consider this. I just talked about production, right? A failure, and I'm sure that capitalism has a lot to do with this. A failure of, I have a sneaking suspicion that capitalism has a lot to do with this. A failure of the way we view artists, and particularly writers, is that success it's all tied to what you can produce, the receipts of your labor. I think that writing, the work of writing is not just what you put on a page, it is your whole life that makes your returning to the page easier, right? When I have writer's block, it is me being told that I need to go out and be human in one of the other ways I love being human, so that the world might open itself up to me in a new way that makes the return to the page easier, and that is also writing. If I have writer's block and I go outside and I go on a run, and along that run, I see two birds tenderly fighting over the last bit of bread out of a trash can until they decide to share it and then fly away to separate corners of the country or whatever, that is writing, right? That makes my return to the page easier.
It's so lovely.
And so, what we're doing right now is writing, right? Anything you do that makes your path to articulating your passions and curiosities easier is an act of writing, and I think that is what writer's block is demanding out of us, is that we find other ways to push ourselves that don't have to do with production. Does that make sense? Did I just doom you for, I don't know.
That makes sense, thank you.
Of course.
Word. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Dejana.
Hi, Dejana.
So basically, I'm involved in this poetry competition, right? And originally it was used as an outlet to write about things that affected me, but as I go through it, I'm seeing a lot of the stories sound the same. And it's like, so I was advised to like this idea that don't write a poem that everybody else is writing. Don't write a Black Death poem. But I feel like, how do I not write about something that, because it still needs to be talked about. And I feel like not writing about it is just giving up on it. But how do I write a story, my story, that also looks like so many other people's stories and still have something new to say?
Well, because you live a life that is individually unique to you and no one else, right? The thing is, the Black Death poem is not just a Black Death poem. No poem is one single thing, right? I refuse to believe that any poem is one single thing. Your poem is an opportunity for perhaps a single entrance. If you want to say this is a Black Death poem, that's fine. There's your poem's single entrance. The work of the poet is to build multiple exits, right? And so you have the capacity to do that because you live a unique life that no one else has lived, right? You have a way of seeing that surely not everyone has. And so my thought on that is find your way into the poem as easily or as monolithically as you want to, but your work as the poet is to build unique exits for both yourself and the audience, right? And you could look at that the other way too, and try to build as many entrances as possible, and have that single exit. When I sat down to write those flower poems, I was just like, very much like, I'm gonna just Google flowers. I'm gonna just like Google and research flowers, because I don't know shit about flowers. But I'm not writing about flowers. I'm writing about fear. I'm writing about loneliness, and that is the large door from which all the other smaller ones spring, right? And so I think that's something to think about, is that you ideally are not writing a poem just about Black Death, you're also writing a poem about many other things. And a poem has to be able to hold all of those things at once, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I consider different doorways.
Jeff.
Hey, my name's Jeff. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I have a question. It's a two-parter because I didn't hear you address this. What was the turning point for you that got you into writing in the first place? And second, performing poetry is different than writing poetry, and I'm curious about how you feel about performing your poetry.
Okay, so I got into writing mostly because I loved music when I was young, and I grew up in a house where music was played a lot but not talked about a lot. And I had no one to really dialogue with about music, and so there was a lot of, when you're like 13 or 14 and like you want to talk about like, side A of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, like that's really, you know what I mean? Like you don't have a demographic really. And so I was building my own demographic within my own journal, right? I was like writing these things. I learned how to, like the thing about my work is that I know very much that I could talk technically about the technical aspects of music because I did it from age like 13 and 19. In a journal I would talk about drum runs and like things, but no one cares about that. If people want to, I can do that wonderfully. I love to talk about the technical elements of hip hop, you know what I mean? Like, I can tell you just off of ear, off of like hearing each of their songs, like what makes Vic Mensa a technically vastly different rapper than Chance, right? It's just like there on its face. But no one really cares. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not.
I care.
We care in like a barbershop way, but that's not an exciting long form piece of writing, So that is kind of how I began. But I got into performance. It's funny, my first entry into poetry was slam, but it's only because I didn't start writing poems till 2011, and I didn't know how to write poems. And so I would go to the local slams in Columbus, where I'm from, and every week, if you wanted to participate in the slam, you had to bring 2 new poems. And so I only did that because it was how I knew I could write. It forced me to write new poems. And the thing people always said to me was like, well, your work won't go over well because you read as though you're in conversation with an audience, and that doesn't feel authoritative. And I was like, well, that's just what I know how to, like that's what I do. And it worked out well. I had like a good 2-year run in slam or whatever,
man.
2 or 3 year run.
Yeah, you did your thing.
Where, I think the best work of performance is to perform as though you are in a genuine conversation with a listener who is as uncertain of the right answer as you are.
That reminds me of the Whitney Houston thing.
Well, when he's
Just her lack of certainty in her own body, right?
Yeah.
Is there a difference when someone does storytelling or someone just does writing, or they try to tell the story from the writing?
I don't think so. I mean, but that's just my work, right? I think I'm a heavy narrative poet, and so like a lot of my work is rooted in story, and a lot of the work I love is kind of rooted in story. And I think if there is a difference, my hope is that my storytelling is perhaps providing like 6 to 8 different avenues for which, it's like I prefer the choose your own adventure kind of thing where at the end of the poem you might feel several different things. But I think that's the only difference.
This is going to be our last question.
Oh, no.
Just a reminder, book sales and signing are happening through this door over here on your right, underneath our logo here. And if you're interested, please head out this door. Otherwise, you can head out the doors you came in the back.
Last question.
So much pressure. I want to preface this by saying I have Abdul in my name, so just prefacing my question. So I was wondering the meaning, like if you could share the meaning of your name and how it might have shaped your writing and career.
Well, definitely hasn't shaped the writing career much, but I think it's given me a lot of guilt. So Hanif means righteous or righteous follower, which certainly not, but I try. And Abdurraqib, I believe, is in a similar vein, like means servant of the Lord, which like kind of not, but trying. It's I don't know if that's much shaped my writing career, but it has given me enough guilt to last a few manuscripts.
Woo. It's a great place to end. Cool.
Thank you all.
That's a great last question.